is addressing the crowds on the Mount, as it's known. Anyone who hears my words and puts them into practice is like the wise one who built a house on rock. When the rainy season set in, the torrents came and the winds blew and buffeted the house. It didn't collapse because it had been set solidly on rock. Anyone who hears my words but does not put them into practice is like the fool who built a house on sandy ground. The rains fell, the torrents came, the winds blew and lashed against the house, and it collapsed and was completely ruined. Jesus finished speaking and left the crowds spellbound at his teaching, because he taught with an authority that was unlike their religious scholars. Thus ends the reading. Our second reading comes from an earlier part of the book of Kings, which we read from last week. And this is as Solomon begins his reign as ruler of Israel. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned for 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron, and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the judgment seat of David, and his rule was firmly established. And then from chapter 3. Solomon showed his love for God by following the precepts of David, except that he still offered sacrifices and incense at the shrines. Solomon went to Gibeon to offer a sacrifice that was the chief shrine, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, God appeared in a dream to the ruler during the night, saying, "Ask what you would like me to give you." Solomon replied, "You have shown great kindness to your servant David, who was faithful, righteous, and obedient to you, and you have generously maintained this constant love toward us. And now you have appointed a successor to sit on the judgment seat this very day. Now, Almighty my God, you have continued this kindness to David's successor to sit on the judgment seat this day. Here I am in the midst of your chosen people, a people so numerous they cannot be counted. Give me, your servant, a discerning heart, so that I may distinguish good from evil and govern your people with wisdom." God was pleased that Solomon requested what he said. So God said to Solomon, "Because this is what you ask for, and not for a long life, or for wealth, or for the lives of your foes, but ask for discernment in administering justice, I grant your request. And I give you a heart so wise and so understanding that there has been no one like you before your time, nor will there be after your time. And furthermore, I give you those items for which you did not ask, wealth and glory, which no ruler in your time can match. If you keep my ways, keep our laws and commandments as David followed them, I will grant you also long life." Thus ends the reading. Siri, what's the meaning of life? Hey Siri, what's the meaning of life?
Nobody really knows, but I'd say anything that involves smiling is probably a good place to start.
All right, that's a decent answer. You never know what you're going to get with Siri. Sometimes she's rather churlish or sarcastic, but that wasn't bad. Siri or Google may give us some answers, and of course, we always need to cross-check those. I think we've reached a point where we really need to double check things and be like good librarians and students and always look for sources and compare different expert opinions. So Siri's good, but only partially, and so is Google, but only as far as you take it. Do any of you remember the movie Big? Oh yeah, yeah. I hear people saying for sure. Big was a huge breakthrough film for Tom Hanks. I'm not sure if I remember him having much in the way of films before that, although he was on a TV show. And in Big, the movie, in case you haven't seen it, this 10-year-old boy version of Hank's character is at an amusement park. I think it might be Coney Island, but I'm not sure. And he's suddenly by himself, and he comes upon this big wish-granting machine, Zoltar. And after he puts in his 25 cents, Zoltar lights up and flashes, "Make your wish." The boy whispers his wish. "I wish I was big." And it makes noises and clanking and lights flash, and then it issues a card that says, "Your wish is granted." I kind of like that movie. I haven't seen it in a while. Maybe we should watch it again. As we read about Solomon this morning, who was very young when this story happens, he assumed the throne when he was maybe in his very late teens, maybe 20. And the way God is portrayed in this version of the story, kind of like Zoltar a little bit, huh? Like a wish-granting machine almost, because Solomon had offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar, and at Gibeon, God appeared to him in a dream and said, "What would you like me to give you? Make your wish." But instead of big bucks or success or long life, young Solomon already somehow has the wisdom to ask for a discerning heart. That's miles ahead of asking for more wishes, and it sounds sincere. And let's be clear, God is not a Zoltar-like creature, a wish-granting machine, and the whole point of the story is woven in between the lines and in the midst of it, like so many good stories are. The point of reading the Bible is not to find literal, historical, factual truths, but to look for the spiritual truth carried in the midst of the story. And Solomon had grown up watching the tumultuous reign of his father David, who was gifted and successful, but flawed as the ruler of a fast-growing nation, Israel. Now Solomon, barely age 20, some scholars say, is faced with leading this vast and increasingly complex nation, which is surrounded by bellicose neighbors. One thing that you don't see in the story is that he'd already had the strategic wisdom, as was the custom of the day, to marry the daughter of one of those bellicose neighbors' leaders. So there was a plan there. Not what we do today, but that's what they did back then. But he still knew that that wasn't going to be enough. He knew that he needed to have wisdom. Solomon's already in the habit of worshiping God, studying God's laws and scriptures and stories, and he's in the habit of praying. And in the habit of the day, he would pray outdoors, and I guess they had a lot of these shrines at high places like mountains. We have a outdoor worship space on a mountain rise. Well, it's sort of similar. And we're worshiping outside. The good thing is, like, unlike in the story, we don't have to sacrifice 1,000 bulls or anything like that. And that would be really messy, and who's going to eat all the meat? Enough to say that Solomon was sincerely seeking to be the best God created him to be. And I think that's a good place for each of us to start each of our days as well. Wisdom doesn't come from just knowledge. Asking Siri or Googling, it's not going to quite do it. And scientific knowledge, it does give us a lot. And it has gotten us to other planets, for instance. But it hasn't given us the wisdom to keep our own planet, Earth, healthy. Historical knowledge, that only helps us if we face it honestly and learn from it. And wisdom doesn't come from just information. We are a whole generation now into the information age. Remember when everybody was talking about that? But we still got unwise people taking things at face value, wacky conspiracy theories based on lies, or buying stuff that's worthless, or we've got people, well, all of us have had those moments where we realize we were looking at this a little too much. And it gives us both information, and sometimes that link can even give us disinformation if we're not careful. So information age hasn't given us wisdom, and certainly not the wisdom to know how to live life to its fullest and to love our neighbors as ourselves. We're still working on that. Wisdom doesn't even come from more experience. Older and wiser, well, not always true. As journalist H.L. Mencken once put it, the older I grow, the more I distrust the familiar doctrine that age brings wisdom. It doesn't give any examples, but all of us could probably think of somebody we know that's our age or older that hasn't figured stuff out yet, hasn't accumulated wisdom from their experience. And wisdom doesn't come from success either. I mean, each of us can think of people with apparent success who foolishly chase what can never satisfy them. And in the process, they make anyone near them as miserable as they are and unsatisfied as they are. Some of these people even get elected to public office. Wisdom takes work. Unlike Zoltar wish-granted gifts of wisdom, true wisdom is something that requires us to learn from mistakes or from suffering. Wisdom takes humility. Solomon at that crucial moment is somehow humble enough, even though he was raised in royalty and was 20 years old, maybe he was scared enough by the responsibility set before him that he asked God, "Give your servant a discerning heart." He wanted to be able to govern God's people and distinguish between right and wrong, to quote him. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had more leaders who believed that they were servants and who would seek a discerning heart to govern and who have a clue about the difference between right and wrong? And to be fair, we do have some leaders like that, and we need to pray for them and vote for them. That's part of our responsibility. Solomon, of course, did get wisdom. As for the rest of us, we have to work at it. Getting wisdom, even with divine help, requires us to work. So let's look at three kinds of wisdom that we can all work on. One is just the general wisdom. It's kind of the common sense, the understanding of the basic pragmatics of life, about the human condition. And if we get this kind of wisdom, we can get it by paying attention. We can get it by looking at history. We can get it by reading good literature. We have a book group, by the way. And they do good literature, right? Any book group people here? Yeah, exactly. Books, good source. And then there's a second kind of wisdom, which is the personal wisdom. This is where a person gains a perspective on themselves. And sometimes we get this by introspection, by pausing when, especially when things don't go well. We're more likely to do it then. Sometimes somebody else having a mistake or a disaster causes us to look at ourselves and wonder, well, that could have been me. And to gain a perspective on ourselves, we begin to develop coping mechanisms. We realize that life is always going to hand us difficult circumstances. And from those, we learn how to empathize and understand other people when they're going through it. Personal wisdom takes humble, personal work. And it's usually done best, or it's enhanced at least, by having a relationship of trust, either with a partner or a pastor or a therapist. Helps us move forward with that personal wisdom. Something we can do all our life long. There's a third kind of wisdom, and that's the self-transcending wisdom. That sounds really highfalutin. But this wisdom depends on people working on their spirituality and people that have a strong connection to a past and future generations, to a community, understand themselves in the flow of humanity. This takes work, and a faith community is one of the best places that we can do that. You're working on this kind of wisdom even as you worship together here this morning, because this kind of wisdom helps us to transcend our own little worlds and realize that God's interests and the world's and humanity's are part of our own. We do it by worship. We have spiritual growth groups in Mountain Rise and studies that enhance this process as well. I encourage you to seek those out. Well, it would be easier, it'd be kind of nice if wisdom came easily. I just thought I had a coin in my pocket, but it turns out to be a guitar pick. But wouldn't it be cool if you could just put a coin in Zoltar and, ask, can I have some wisdom? And it would be great if Siri or Google really could give us answers to life's difficult questions. And they can give us information, but to cultivate real wisdom, we have to practice. We have to work at it, and we have to work at it within a human community. That's how it grows. It's the soil it needs. And I've seen this amongst all of you. I saw it the other day where wisdom and compassion work together through one of our own. And you may have seen his Facebook post. Mountain Riser Cal Dickerson posted this, and I got permission to share this. It says, quote, "A couple of days ago I was walking along Main Street in Rochester, and I almost missed it at first, but then took another look. On a bus stop bench sat a woman dressed in a hospital gown and blanket. Nothing else. I deduced two things. First, she wasn't getting on the bus. Second, healthcare facilities don't discharge people in gowns and blankets. Called 911 and waited for a female officer to help her into her patrol car. In our throwaway society, the thing we throw away most is humanity." End quote. I'm so glad that Cal shared that, because that was wisdom in action. And really, in the end, when compassion and wisdom work together as they must, that's how we develop true wisdom. Gandhi once wrote, "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members." That's wisdom, folks. Cal put it into action. The true measure of each of our own wisdom, our own humanity, our own faith is in the end how we treat others. It's what we do. Writer Julian DeSazer says, "Wisdom is the ability to know right from wrong, to choose the right, and then do right. Knowing, choosing, doing. That is how Jesus ends his most famous teachings. Anyone who hears my words and puts them into practice. Practice, folks. We have to practice. This isn't in my notes, but I've noticed I've been busy and I haven't practiced my guitar as much. And I sat down to play something I knew and I was like, what the heck? I used to be able to play this really easily. I realized, wow, you got to practice. Even if you know it, you have to practice. So let's strengthen the muscles of our souls, the wisdom that's wanting to live through us by exercising it, by practicing. We have to know it, choose it, do it. That's how we can become wise. Amen.